Time once again for the Bama Online Podcast. This one on a Monday, July the 3rd, 2023. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnLine.com, alongside my longtime partner at BamaOnline.com, the senior writer for BOL, Charlie Potter. And Charlie, as we sit here on the eve of the 4th of July, what does the Potter household have in mind for the big holiday?
Yeah, it's a weird one because we talked about it before. My wife's a nurse, so she has, just like us, a weird schedule. So she works today and Wednesday, and so we have to have like a fine window. So we're gonna go up to Piedmont to the Redneck Yacht Club and go
Nice.
kayaking with the family. So that should be fun. Probably get good and drunk and sunburnt. So that's what the fourth's about, right?
And the cool water will feel good, man. I got out. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I was out early enough this morning to do the yard work with this
Ooh.
oppressive heat we have now. I think I drank like 6 Powerade Zeros in the course of mowing a quarter acre lawn, not a full acre, not a half acre, just a quarter acre. Almost took me out this morning. It is so hot out there. And by the way, no vodka in those Powerade Zeros as of yet.
As of yet,
Yeah, they were
keyword.
light. They were totally light and legit. But a lot to get into on the latest edition of the Bama Online Podcast. What we're going to do today is 5 questions for the Crimson Tide heading into the 4th of July. We're going to have a little basketball for you. We're going to have some football for you. So, Charlie, you ready to get these going?
Yeah, really looking forward to it.
Let's do it. Okay. Question number 1, Charlie. In light of recent addition and subtraction to the Alabama men's basketball team, how confident are you that this next team will maintain the program's place as a legitimate contender on both the conference and national levels? With the way things sit right now, and understanding still some moving pieces, as we know, some visitors that we know making their way to Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I mean the roster is still very much in flux. They've got 11 guys so far. I think to answer the question, I think yes, that I do feel confident that they can still be in contention for that. I do think though it's going to depend on some things. Losing Charles Bediako and Javon Quinterly kind of late in the game hurts a little bit because I think everyone knew that Brandon Miller and Noah Clowney were moving on. The guys that entered the portal pretty shortly after the season ended weren't that big of surprises given the way that we saw their minutes break down toward the end of the season. But I think there was a lot of optimism and belief that Charles Bediako was going to come back after testing the NBA draft waters. And then with Javon Quinterly entering the portal in June, those just aren't ideal situations. Those are veteran players. Bediako is kind of your anchor on defense. Javon Quinterly, while inconsistent, had some huge moments in an Alabama uniform. He was big, especially down the stretch last year. So you counter that with what you've kind of done in the transfer portal, and with bringing in guys like Aaron Estrada and Grant Nelson, I think really helps. And I think to really kind of hinge on this, I think the development of some of the young players, guys like Nick Pringle, especially Rylan Griffin, I think if they can kind of take that next step, then this team can be right there in the mix for the SEC. And I don't think they'll be the number one overall seed in an NCAA tournament, but I think they could be, not sweating it come Selection Sunday. So I don't think Alabama's going to take a huge step back. I think this is a top 25 team, but losing the number 2 overall pick, another first round pick, and then several players to the transfer portal or to the NBA in Bediako's case, it's a lot to overcome. I think Natos and company have done a good job in kind of securing things, but we'll see how some of these guys develop under this system.
Yeah, I think that the additions recently of Jaron Stevenson and Grant Nelson helped to really offset the departure, or at least the entry into the transfer portal by Javon Quinterly. Now, look, you get to March and it becomes, as we know, largely about guard play. So you are putting a lot on guys like Mark Sears and Aaron Estrada and Latrell Wrightsell and Rylan Griffin. But those I think are going to prove to be capable guys, at least 3 of the 4. I'd be surprised if fewer than 3 of those 4 guys don't prove capable of really playing at that high level that Alabama fans have grown accustomed to. But I'll ask you this, with the additions to the front court recently, Which would you think is most important here in filling out this roster? If you had to pick between, say, another ball handler type or another post type, which area of need do you think Alabama needs to hit on the most?
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned with the guard play, if all four of Estrada, Wrightsell, Sears, and Griffin are healthy and contributing in a positive way, which I think they will, then you feel pretty good about your backcourt because then you can throw in guys like Davin Cosby, maybe Chris Parker, even though he's a bigger wing, to play that. And some of these guys, these bigger guys, can also handle the ball, so that's some versatility that helps. So I think, to me at least, it makes sense for them to kind of look for some additional front court help, if anything, for bodies in practice, because we know that Mo Diabate is a guy that's coming off an injury. He's expected to play this season, but you lose Bediako, you lose Clowney, you lose Noah Gurley. So you need not only guys to be able to absorb fouls in games, but guys to be able to play minutes in practice. So I think whenever you see that you're looking at two guys from West Virginia, one being a guard and one being a big, the big makes a lot of sense just because you don't need to go out and find maybe a starter. You need to find maybe a guy that can come off the bench and then also just be a guy that can bang around in practice. So I think for me, front court help makes the most sense.
Yeah, Muhammad Wagi, the big from West Virginia that we're alluding to here. And, maybe he can be Nick Pringle from a year ago, right? If you
That'd be
get him,
ideal.
a
Yeah.
guy that can give you 10 to 12 minutes. But as you said, practice time is important. And also those 5 fouls that you need because, there's the potential. What if Pringle and Nelson get into early foul trouble in some games? You got to have another guy or two, even with Stevenson coming on board to be able to pick up the slack. No doubt about that. So let's get into a little bit of football talk. We're going to kind of go basketball, football, back into some basketball as we weave through these 5 questions for the Crimson Tide. Charlie, SEC Media Days just a couple of weeks away in Nashville, Tennessee this time around. First time for the event in the Music City. So with that, who are your early, I guess it's not really that early, it's coming up. Who are your student athlete picks for Alabama to join Nick Saban at SEC Media Days 2023?
Well, first off, I still wish it was in Birmingham. It's so
Yes.
convenient for us there. I'll be interested to see what they do in Nashville because Atlanta just hasn't been it the last 2 times they've done it there. So looking forward to that. But for me, I feel very confident about this. I'll be surprised if it's not Kool-Aid McKinstry, Dallas Turner, and JC Latham. Now, you look at that, and that's 3 juniors. Alabama tends to send at least one senior to these events. But you look at the guys, and I think back to the spring, the players that were made available to us, there just weren't a lot of seniors that, one, have come up a lot, and two, that are kind of these big names in the sport. You look at the early mock drafts, these are 3 guys that are very consistently projected to be first round picks in April. They're going to be guys that are preseason All-American. So I think with the amount of times we got Kool-Aid in Dallas last year, JC is a guy that seems to be very comfortable, just talking behind a microphone. I would be shocked if it's not that junior trio.
A lot of star power in those 3 guys. As you said, you look at mock drafts right now, they're all 3 in the first round of those for the most part, if not unanimously. I'll give you a guy that I kind of would like there to be room for is Justin Aboigbe, because you talk about a story, right?
Yeah.
And this is a 5th-year guy, and kind of as a reward for what he's been through in the last 8 or 9 months. Again, just from a story perspective, and a guy you'd like to see rewarded, I would throw Justin Aboigbe in there too. But it's going to be tight with that kind of star power.
Yeah, I kind of went down the list. Boygby makes sense because he is a senior. He just hasn't come up a lot, and some of that was because of the injury last year. He came up in the spring, which I think might have been only his second time. Coming up and speaking to us at the Mount Moore facility. A guy like Seth McLaughlin kind of makes sense. Maybe you give him the edge over JC Latham, but Seth's only come up after a game once. I think he did head coach in the spring. But I'm just kind of trying to look at their past and what they've done from a
Yep.
media standpoint. Because if Alabama's not comfortable with them coming up, then they're sure as hell not going to Nashville. But one guy that I actually lobbied for was Will Reichard.
Hell yeah. I mean, come on. Specialists are people too.
I will say, I think Will got kind of burnt a little bit because I talked to him in New Orleans about his decision to enter the draft, and that at that time he was expected to leave, and then people kind of made a big deal about it with like some breaking news graphics and stuff like this was him formally announcing, but he had already kind of made that decision, and then he decides to come back. So maybe Will doesn't want to, but that was my kind of, I guess, dark horse candidate for Nashville.
Yeah, I like that. I like that pick of Will Reichard. You talk about a guy who has been ultra productive. What Alabama's all-time leading scorer already,
Mm-hmm.
I think, in Will Reichard. So he's got the numbers to back it up. So we'll delve back into some hoops now. In and out we go here, Charlie.
Okay.
And the question is, if Nick Pringle and Grant Nelson get the nod in the front court for Alabama as starters, who would be your picks to join them in the starting lineup for Alabama at the 1, 2, and 3 spots next season?
For me, the slam dunk is Mark Sears, coming back from the NBA draft. I think he can play the two. We've seen him be the one plenty of times last season, but I think with Aaron Estrada coming on, the transfer from Hofstra, sounds like he's been doing some good things in practice. I think he makes sense to kind of slide in there at the one. So I think that's a really dynamic duo, especially with JQ moving on. You have an experienced guard to slide in there. It just makes too much sense not to pick that. And at the three, I think they could go a few different ways, but I kind of like Rylan Griffin there. He's a bigger wing, a guy that can play the two for sure, but a guy that played quite a bit as a true freshman. I think is only going to improve. I remember Nate Oates talking about him last year and how he's going to be a big part of the program in the future. Well, the future is now. And for me, I think at least for game one, it can always change. We saw it change last year, but I think that it makes sense for Estrada, Sears, and Griffin, 1, 2, 3.
You got my three. That's who I would go with. I think Estrada is more of an on the ball guy than, say, Latrell Wrightsell,
Mm-hmm.
and even Mark Sears. So that makes total sense on the basketball. And I like Rylan Griffin too. I think Wrightsell obviously be in that mix, at least you would hope. You mentioned Cosby earlier. I think that's another guy that probably shouldn't be overlooked. I think he kind of got lost in the mix because he came in mid-year, so there really wasn't the celebration about his arrival or the
Right.
notoriety about it. But he could be one of those guys that impacts things, and maybe we're not talking quite enough about. But I like your three there with Estrada, Sears, and Rylan Griffin. And of course, defensively, we get so much caught up into the offensive aspect of things. As we know, with Nate Oates, defense is going to have a whole lot to do with it, especially your ability to play man-to-man defense and play it well on the basketball. Back to football, Charlie. Here we go. What is the anticipated impact of the departure of defensive lineman Jamil Burroughs from the Alabama football program? That had been a storyline that had been followed for a week or so. There were reports, I believe Tony Sulkakis first had that. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Charlie, about the potential for Jamil Burroughs to move on. We got word late last week that he had in fact entered the transfer portal. So, Charlie, when you look at that situation, what are some of your takeaways with the departure of the veteran defensive lineman?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it a couple ways. One, it's never good to lose a guy that seemed to be poised to make an impact this year. And, Jamil Burroughs has flashed some. It hasn't been consistent, which that's kind of been the MO for defensive linemen here of late since Quentin Williams. But when you talk to teammates, they've had nothing but good things to say about him. And I think it was even Tyler Booker said that he expects him to be one of the best pass rushers in the country. So, high praise from a guy that's facing him every day in practice. But on the same side of things, I think it creates opportunities for other players. And he's a guy that saw the field quite a bit last year, but Jamarian Latham is a guy that I think could certainly benefit. He was out in the spring with an injury, but he's someone that should see plenty of minutes this fall. A guy like James Smith, incoming true freshman, we saw him get some first team reps in the spring. I think that could only continue with a guy maybe ahead of him, moving on from the program. You can name a few guys. I think Damon Payne is someone we saw get some opportunities. So I think it's kind of twofold. As one, you don't want to lose a guy that seemed poised to be able to contribute this fall, especially from an interior pass rush standpoint, because for Alabama, that's just kind of been hit or miss. of late. But then at the same time, there's so many young players in that defensive line room. You look at it, you've got Justin Aboigbe, Tim Smith, Jamil Burroughs, Jamarian Latham. Those are the only guys that were non-sophomores and freshmen. One of those guys moves on. So now you've got, second and first year players, some of them, I guess, being third year players as well, but now having more of an opportunity. So, that depth that you have, they're going to have to grow up pretty quickly, but I think it creates opportunities for those young guys, and that can, sometimes be a good thing.
Yeah, regardless, it's time for some dudes to surface in
Yeah.
that defensive line room. They've got, as you outlined, they've got plenty of guys. I think they've got a lot of quality in that defensive line group, but they need some legit war daddy types, whether it's Jaheim Otis, whether it is Justin Aboigbe as a full grown man in his 5th year in the program. Tim Smith certainly has played a lot of football. You said it, everybody moves up a spot. I think there's even potential for a guy like Monkel Goodwine to
Mm-hmm.
have a chance, more so maybe in situational roles. But right now, if you have pass rush ability, especially, they're going to figure out a way to get you involved. And that's where, guys still have opportunities. I'm with you on Jamarian Latham. I've been a fan of his. He's always been a real effort guy. I think physically he's getting to the point, or has gotten to the point where he's more of a viable candidate on multiple downs, whether instead of just third down. But absolutely, a lot of opportunity, and a lot of people are going to look at James Smith, as they should. I mean, a hell of a recruit, early enrollee, and as is the case with a lot of these guys, right? How they progress through these 3 or 4 months leading up to fall camp will tell a lot of the story. So our final question for 5 questions for the Crimson Tide, Charlie, on this Monday: if Alabama is going to win at least 11 regular season games, blank will need to happen. What in the blank is the blank, Charlie?
There's a lot of things I could have put down here. I actually have a notepad and I kind of wrote some things down, scratched some things out. I wrote down offensive line. I think that's going to be critical, especially with how they've talked about being dominant and the way they want to play. I think inside linebacker play is going to be really important, and that kind of coincides with defensive line play. I think really just overall defensive identity. I think that that's going to be really big under Kevin Steele to kind of get back to what Alabama is known for. And I think really just the interior defensive line play and inside linebacker play will go a long way in determining that. But it comes down to QB. I think just consistent quarterback play can help Alabama win a minimum of 11 games. And that might sound kind of easy, but when you look at the 3 guys that are atop that pecking order, Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, Tyler Buckner, they all have kind of been inconsistent so far, at least in the spring. And then Tyler Buckner and his, limited availability at Notre Dame. I think cutting down on turnovers, taking what the defense gives, and just, getting the ball to playmakers is big. And they need to do that. All of them do, on a more consistent basis. I think they've worked on that this offseason. But for them, they don't need to be Bryce Young. They need just to be consistent, take care of the football, and distribute the ball to the playmakers on offense. If they can do that, then yeah, I think with the offensive line, the guys at receiver, tight end, running back, and then even though the defense has to replace a lot, I think there's young talent. If they can just have consistent quarterback play, there's no reason this team can't be in the mix to get back to Atlanta.
Yeah, I like both of yours with the emphasis on between the numbers, between the hash marks defensively, whether it's the defensive line and the linebackers and that front 7. Passing game was a way I thought of going as well. And with quarterback, I would include the wide receiver play in that. It's got to be better than it was last year. And I think a number that I would put for that area that might equate to a highly successful season might have more to do with yards per attempt for Alabama's quarterbacks. Because if they're running the ball like they're talking about they're going to run it, or we're believing they're going to run it, Charlie, they should be able to hit on some intermediate to deep type of pass plays, including with the tight ends in that too. So, but what I'll do is I'll go schedule. I'll say if Alabama is going to win at least 11 regular season games, they will hold serve at home in all those marquee games, right?
Yeah.
Starting with Texas, man. I know people kind of look at Texas and go, they'll just Texas. I don't know. I think that's going to be a dogfight on September the 9th, man. I'm very impressed with what Texas brings back from a roster perspective. So I'll go with the home schedule. If Alabama takes care of business against Texas, against Tennessee, those kind of games at home, LSU, really pick a month, right? September, October,
Yeah.
November. You got a marquee type game in Tuscaloosa. I'll go with that because I think on the road, Alabama should be fine. Although 3 out of the last 4 years, Alabama's dropped a road game. And I know you think of that and go, well, damn, a lot of teams drop road games, but we're talking about Alabama standard here. So I don't know, Charlie. I just think the home schedule this year, if the Crimson Tide can do that against those teams, win against those teams, Texas A&M on the road, Auburn on the road. Alabama's lost at those places in recent years, but I feel a lot better about 11 wins for this team if they're unbeaten in Tuscaloosa.
No, I like that a lot because the marquee games on the schedule are at home. And, Texas, I think people look at it a bunch of different ways. I'm with you. I think that's going to be an unbelievable atmosphere. It's good to have a home game like that at Bryant-Denny. That's a little different than what we're used to. It being prime time is going to be electric. But look at last year's game. I know it was in Austin and those fans were juiced up, but that was just a fist fight of a game. And Bryce Young had to do a lot in that game to win it, but Bryce isn't here anymore. So again, it goes back to that consistent quarterback play. If those guys can just do what they need to do, then sure. But it's going to be tough. Those are 3 tough home games. Those should be exciting Saturdays in Tuscaloosa. And if they take care of those games, you don't anticipate them losing a game on the road, but like you said, it's happened more often than not. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I don't want to undervalue that road schedule, man, because we've seen it. What happened the last time Alabama went to A&M?
Yep.
With Bryce Young. You don't have to go far back to find an Alabama loss down on the plains. We know that. Even Kentucky, where it falls on the schedule in mid-November with Devin Leary in there now from North Carolina State as Kentucky's quarterback, I wouldn't sleep on that game either. It just feels like, though, if Alabama is good enough to take care of that type of competition in those type of marquee games at Bryant-Denny Stadium, they should be capable of taking care of business on the road. And that Texas game, I'll tell you what Alabama doesn't want. You don't want to get down 14-0 early to Quinn Ewers and that offense. And you said it. I think mindset's going to be a big part of that game too. I mean, does anybody think Texas is going to go to Tuscaloosa fearful of playing Alabama at Bryant-Denny Stadium? Now, I know the crowd and all that is going to be very much in UA's favor, but I don't get that sense, Charlie, that, Texas is thinking, we have to go to Tuscaloosa. I think Texas is looking at September 9th like we get to go to Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I bet that's exactly what Sark has been preaching since. I don't even know who Texas has open the season, but I bet he's preached that all off season long, is that opportunity to go there and to make a statement earlier in the season. Because how often do people have that narrative of Texas being back? Well, what the hell would push that over the mountaintop than to beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa? So yeah, I don't think that they're looking at that any kind of way other than an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun, man. I don't know if it's been as fun as the 4th, but it's up there. I know you got a big 4th plan. What about food for the 4th? Will there be any grilling? We're pretty traditional. We stick with the hot dogs, brats. I'm going to do burgers. And the thing is now, it's not enough just to do burgers. You got people that want fat burger or they want smash burger. You know how burgers have become so crafty. So are you a fat burger guy, Charlie, or are you a smash burger type, or does it matter?
Um, it doesn't matter. I will say, I don't know what it is. This might say more about me than anything. I'm a strict 1 patty man. I don't double me up. It doesn't matter what the size is, just don't double me up. Now, smash burger, you can maybe throw 2 on there.
Yeah,
But
that's when I have to double up. If you
but like
smash me, I got to double up.
but I mean a smash burger is good. I don't know what's on the menu because we're going back home, so I'm not in charge of that,
Going
thank
to the
God.
B.
Yeah. My brother-in-law is the grill master, and
Okay.
I'm very happy to
Well,
relinquish
you're in a
that.
great spot. I
Yeah.
mean, that's perfection.
Yeah. I just have to bring along some beers to hand out, and then I get fed. So that's all that matters.
Ice
Yep.
cold beer. Best kind of beer, Charlie. Ice cold beer.
Ice cold but free beer.
Well, that's the great thing about this podcast too. It's free. And so if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. We certainly appreciate you joining us here on the Bama Online Podcast. We certainly encourage you to join us, of course, at BamaOnline.com. You talk about news nonstop on the football recruiting front just in the last week. Couple of new commitments for Nick Saban's program. We've got all that covered for you with Tim Watts and Andrew Bone and Clint Lamb and Jimmy Stein, and of course, Mr. Charlie Potter. And I try to help out as I can. But Charlie, as always, a lot of fun, man. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem, man. I think before we get out of here, we got to give Clint some congratulations. Look like he popped the question.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so recently
Wow.
engaged Clint Lamb. So congrats to
Awesome.
him.
Congrats to Clint Lamb. No doubt about it. Honest man, Clint Lamb now. About to be anyway. All right, Charlie, be safe out there. I want to, next time we do this, I want to check and make sure you got all your digits after the 4th. I worry about that. No mortars or blowing things up,
I haven't shut off a bottle rocket in quite some time. I don't really plan on amping that up this year. So I should have all 10.
Maturity. It's such a beautiful thing. But Charlie, we'll do it again soon and appreciate it. Once again, for Charlie Potter, Travis Reier, thanking you for joining us right here on the Bama Online Podcast. Until next time, so long, everybody.